This is our second meeting of the review of regulatory licensing child care providers in the state of Georgia. We're happy to have many of you. Many faces are returning from for 2 weeks ago, and we appreciate you being here. We also appreciate the service of the agencies that have come to both meetings now. It's good to have you both here for both meetings to hear from the providers themselves. And now today's agenda is going to be informational primarily, to listen to the agencies, to get an overview of their responsibilities, and help educate us on their roles and their regulatory responsibilities. I want to thank the members of the committee. Thank you all for being here again, taking time out of your summer and early fall to join us and to work on this particular important issue. Chairman Weldon is, we're going to dial him up and add him to us by conference call. 47588. And Representative Tanner is on his way and will be with us shortly. What I'd like to do is, there are certain agencies that I've already discussed this particular Hey, Tom. Chairman, how are you?
Good. How are you, sir?
Good. We're alive and streaming. At least I hope so. You could tell us if we're streaming. You could probably pull us up on the computer to find out.
Yeah, that's where I'll be.
Good. Good. I was just introducing that today we're going to do an update of from the agencies, hear from them, and take in information from them today. And this is mostly informational. I would like to ask every committee members, feel free to ask questions during their presentations or after. It's important to try to gather as much information as possible. We have certain agencies that I've discussed with earlier that have a very limited role in terms of their regulatory oversight of child care providers. So what I'd like to do is first call Chris Rustin from DPH to speak. And then we'll move on to some of the heavy hitters in the regulatory arena on this particular issue. Mr. Rustin, thank you for joining us, and I think your mic is on, so test it and be sure.
Test. Okay.
Okay, good. Before you start, are there any questions or concerns or issues with the committee that I need to know about before we get started? Okay, seeing none. All right, Mr. Rustin, go ahead, please.
Sure. Well, good morning, Representative Welsh and the committee. I appreciate you inviting us here to discuss the role of the Department of Public Health in these types of facilities. I'm the Director of Environmental Health for the Department of Public Health, and the Food Service Inspection Program is one of the programs that falls under our purview. Under the DHS Residential Child Care Institution Program, their rules require that child care institutions licensed to care for 13 or more children obtain a food service permit from the local county health department. These particular permits fall under the Department of Public Health's food service rules and regulations, so they are consistently applied across the state. We are typically notified, or the local health departments are typically notified, that when an operator of a home calls them or shows up and says that they need to get a food service permit in their facility. One thing I do want to point out about our particular rules, they're based on a risk-based inspection process. When we go into these facilities and do our inspections, we're looking at items that we feel are the most risk for the children that are in these particular homes. One of the questions that came up was, how many inspections do we conduct per year? Well, that's based on the type of facility and the risk of the menu items, but on average we are typically in there inspecting the kitchen 2 times a year on average. Again, one of the things that we have worked very consistently across the state is we have about 380 environmental health staff that work for the local health departments across the state. And we have worked very diligently to train all of them on our food service regulations through a standardization process to ensure that they are consistently applying the inspections when they're in these facilities the same way in every county. And anytime we have an issue with a facility that doesn't feel that the rules are being applied correctly, that's something that our staff at the state office can look into, working with that particular county health department. The type of equipment that is typically required in these facilities is generally going to be based on the menu items. Most of the equipment is commercial grade equipment when you start getting into a more centralized approach to preparing food. But that's essentially the Department of Public Health's role in these facilities. It's focused on just the food service application with the kitchen. And I can certainly entertain any questions if you all have any.
Any questions from members of the committee? I have a few. Yes, Ms. Houston.
First of all, I've been real pleased with the changes y'all made in inspection, and I think in my area you're doing a great job, and the paper is doing a great job in reporting and getting everybody's attention. Now, do y'all grade youth homes the same, A, B, C, D, like you do
Yes,
commercial?
the inspection process is the same across
Exactly
the
the
state.
same.
Whether it's a restaurant, whether it's one of these group homes, and they get graded the same way, A, B, C, or U, which means unsatisfactory.
Unsatisfactory.
Right, correct.
Okay, and when they have a website that they put on different violations, do all these violations count the same? I know with y'all they don't count the same.
No, violations are based on the risk. So the higher risk items have a higher point deduction items. For example, if we see that a food is not being cooked at the proper temperature, that would carry a higher point deduction than dirty floors, for example, because you're not getting the chance of getting ill from a dirty floor is very low, but the chance of getting ill from a particular food item not being cooked correctly is very high.
Well, it's my understanding on this website it just has a number of violations. Do y'all's violations go in with the other when they rate how they rate it on the website?
Are you referring to our website, the Department of
No,
Public
I'm
Health?
talking about the website where they put group homes on.
From my understanding, our scoring system doesn't get factored into the overall scoring.
Okay.
That from my understanding.
Okay, thank you. That's what I wanted to find out. Thank you. And I think y'all do a great job.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Chairman.
I wanted to ask you,
If you could use your mic.
I want to ask you, Ms. Ruffin, with the, I guess, charge the committee is looking at coordination of various agencies, is there anything that you know of that would cause problems with having your inspections done coordinated with other agencies that come out to these homes for the purpose of doing either annual or semi-annual inspections?
One of the things that our inspections are unannounced, obviously, and the purpose of that is to ensure we get an accurate picture of what's going on in the kitchen. I don't really see that there could be an issue with coordinations of inspections, but we would like for our inspections to be somewhat unannounced in the kitchen. And it's from our experience that if we announce an inspection of a food service facility, that when we show up, everything will be perfect. And some people are perfect. They do a very good job in their facilities, but our goal is to catch and to try to determine if there's any issues in the facility that needs correcting, or if we can help educate them on a better way of doing something when it comes to preparation of food.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Other questions from the committee? A few. While the frequency and number, you'd mentioned that there is a difference in the frequency and number, but it would be helpful, I think, to the committee to know actually what that breakdown is. I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you've got frequency and number based upon the size of the kitchen or the size of the facility relative to the number of customers, if you will, or the children that are going to be served. Is that fair to say?
Actually, the frequency is based on the risk type of the facility.
Okay.
Our facilities are broken down into risk type 1 facilities. These are facilities that essentially do not cook food. An example could be a coffee shop. There's limited items in the facility. There's no cooking or cooling processes, and we only inspect those facilities one time a year. A risk type 2 facility is most likely your average run-of-the-mill type of food service facility. There's cooking processes going on, there's cooling processes going on, there's potentially freezing processes going on. So there's much more riskier activities that could potentially render food unsafe. we inspect those a minimum of twice a year. And then you have risk type 3 facilities. These facilities are facilities that have what we consider high risk practices. They may have a variance that's been issued by the department based on something that they're doing in the facility that really goes beyond the scope of the rules and makes the facility more at risk to the public. We inspect those facilities 3 times a year at minimum. Now, based on our inspections of the facility, if we're in the facility and we determine that there is issues with that facility, we can add inspections just to ensure that they are meeting the requirements of the rules and regulations.
Those are going to be more with your group homes than you're not inspecting foster homes at all.
No, we only inspect the residential child care institutions that are licensed for 13 or more children.
Okay. And then,
Hey, I got a question.
okay, just a second, let me get the mic over to you. Okay, go ahead.
Could you just comment on any inspections that you're going to be conducting for places like wind-shaped homes or these foster care homes that are not publicly supported?
I'm somewhat unfamiliar with the wind-shaped concept. Are they licensed in any way by?
They are.
If they're licensed by the department, we would actually conduct an inspection based on these particular rules and regulations.
Did you get that, Tom?
I did. I got it.
Okay.
Now, can I follow up, Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
The inspections that you make, are they made on a scheduled basis, or can you make any inspection at any time?
They are not made on a scheduled basis. They are unannounced inspections. But, on average, while we don't make announced inspections, most health departments have a frequency when they're in the facilities. But the actual day and time of the inspector showing up is not announced.
Okay. Can you just comment on the policy behind why you don't have regularly scheduled announced visits at these type of facilities?
Sure. It's been our experience that when we announce inspections, that what we're trying to see when we're in doing an inspection is we want to see activities that are occurring during the busiest times of their food preparation activities. It's been our experience in the past that when we announce the inspection, the actual date and time that we're going to show up at the facility, that we're not really seeing an accurate picture of what's occurring on a normal day-to-day basis. So that's the policy and the reasoning behind not actually announcing the day and time of when we're going to show up to do the inspection of the facility.
And well, let me ask you, if I could, Mr. Chairman, one follow-up question. I think this will end it for me.
As many as you want.
Thanks, sir. So what you're saying is the policy of the agency is to have the ability to go in and inspect a home or someone who's licensed at a time when it's not announced, so that they will have to be prepared at all times for an inspection in the event it occurs, correct?
That is correct. What we want to see when we do an inspection is an accurate picture of the normal day-to-day activities related to the food service facility.
And are you aware of a way that you could still have that incentive for the care providers to be prepared and up to speed and make sure they're complying with the rules that have been set forth?
Well,
if you took away the random visit?
One of the incentives that's in our rules and regulations is based on their inspection history. If they consistently do well on their inspections, we can actually reduce the number of inspections at the facility. And that is one incentive that we actually see across the state with many of the restaurants and the other regulated facilities, is that if they can demonstrate to us compliance with the rules and that they are preparing food safely, we can actually reduce the inspection frequency in the facility.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Houston.
Well, maybe I don't understand that wind-shaped homes is a new concept that came to Georgia, I don't know how many years ago, and these kids are very fortunate, I understand, to live there. But I think that it's a different concept, and have y'all looked at this different concept, that it should be treated a little differently than a residential, a strictly residential home place? Have y'all taken that into account?
Honestly, I'm going to have to go back and look into that. I'm not 100% sure. I would assume.
And maybe this is something new that's come up, and we might need to look at this in a different way.
We'll be happy to take
Because
a look at that.
it's my understanding it's more run like a home, a family, and the parents that live there could go make a unannounced visit, but they might be at the ballpark with all the children.
I do have a question, and maybe it can be answered. Are these facilities, are they licensed for 13 or more children, or are they licensed for less than 13? Because if they're licensed for less than 13, the health department
I have no idea.
would not
I have no idea how they're licensed. But I just know it's so.
Then,
So you
then
wouldn't
the
be
health department would not be inspecting the wind-shaped facilities.
Are they inspecting them?
To my knowledge, not traditionally.
Okay.
Majority of the licenses as well.
Okay, all right. So that's not a problem then.
Okay.
Good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, individuals in the back can answer the question. Would you identify yourself?
Ryan Griffin, I work for Wind-Shaped Homes.
Ryan Griffin works for Wind-Shaped Homes. Ryan Griffin works for Wind-Shaped Homes, and he has said that the homes are a maximum of 12, and as a result, then DPH would not be conducting inspections at those particular homes.
And the food safety aspect falls under the DHS rules. And when their inspectors go out and do their normal inspections, they have basic food safety requirements for facilities that are licensed for less than 13 facilities. So the kitchen is still looked at, but it's not looked at by the Department of Public Health.
You had mentioned the grading. How is the grading? How is that reported, and is it public? And can a member of the public look at this on a website somewhere to see what the grading is, not just for one particular month, but over a series of months, so as to see whether there's been an anomaly or there's a consistency that's positive or negative?
Every health department in Georgia publicizes their inspection results on the website, either through the Department of Public Health or it's linked to the health department's website. So all inspection scores are considered public records and are publicly posted on a website, whether it's the department or the health department. And generally our website displays the last 5 inspections, so you can get a history of the inspection frequency for any facility in the state of Georgia. So if there was an anomaly, you certainly would see that. And in general, when a facility scores poorly, a reinspection is conducted within a certain period of time that may demonstrate that there was an anomaly at that time.
And what is the frequency of the follow-ups? How often are there follow-ups for the various risk types? I know you have a minimum inspection that you've stated for each of the risk types, but what is the frequency of follow-ups?
Sure. Once a facility is first permitted by the local health department, a follow-up routine inspection is conducted within 60 days. Because generally the first inspection is just the operational inspection that is there to ensure that the equipment's in place, that the owner is trained, and that it gives us an idea of the layout of the facility. Within 60 days, an actual routine inspection is conducted. If a facility scores a U, or an unsatisfactory score, an inspection is scheduled within 10 days to do a follow-up on that facility to ensure that they've corrected the hazards. Now, one of the things that I want to point out is if we see risky behavior, risk hazards in the facility, they're required to correct those on site. So if there's something there that would potentially put the children or the public at risk, they do have to make those corrections while we're there to ensure that that activity is not continuing.
Okay, so make sure I've got this straight. You have an initial mandatory minimum inspection, and then you'll have a follow-up within 60 days, regardless of what the score is
Right.
on that particular inspection.
That's correct.
So on a risk level 1, you have one mandatory minimum,
That's correct.
but you're going to have a follow-up, so you're really going to have 2
For the first year, that is correct.
for the first year.
Right.
Okay, and then the subsequent years, whether you have a follow-up or not, will be based upon performance. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then if during that inspection or the follow-up, a U is determined, so you have an unsatisfactory inspection for a particular aspect of the inspection, then there will be a follow-up to that one within 10 days.
That's correct.
Okay. I think it would be helpful to the committee just to have a sense of the group homes that you are regulating and you oversee with 13 or more children, to see what the inspection numbers actually are for the past 2 years would probably be helpful, just to get a sense of the frequency of inspections.
I can certainly provide that to the committee.
Okay. Any other questions or concerns from members of the committee? Mr. Ruskin, thank you very much for your time and the agency's time. Thank you for all the work that you're doing. And I agree with Chairman House, and thank you for some of the reforms that the agency has made at the field level. Those have been appreciated in my home county, Henry County.
Thank you again.
All right, with that, I'd like to call upon Ms. Ashley Fielding to present on behalf of DHS, and I think she has a team with her today. And so what I'll ask you to do, Ms. Fielding, is if you would introduce each person, their name and title, and then allow them to talk, that would be fantastic. Do you need the overhead projector at all?
Not.
Okay.
We do have PowerPoints for you in your folders that give a bit of an overview of each office's function.
And if you would pull the mic close up, because it is difficult to register individual's voice. I've turned the volume up as far as it goes, but it's not working down there. Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee members. My name is Ashley Fielding. I am the legislative liaison for the Department of Human Services, and for the time being, the Division of Family and Children Services. I want to thank you for inviting us to be a part of this thoughtful discussion. I have with me today on my right Carol Winstead. She is the director of the department's residential child care unit that is housed within the Department of Human Services Office of Inspector General. Residential child care serves as the licensing body for providers of residential services. On my left, I have Mrs. Catricia Stokes-Bryan and Miss Diane Yerby Kelly. Ms. Kelly is the head of foster care services for DFACS, and within foster care services is our Office of Provider Management, which Ms. Stokes-Bryan is the director of. She is responsible for seeking out providers that will provide room, board, and watchful oversight for children in DFACS custody. I want to go ahead and tell you up front that this process has already given us an opportunity to be introspective about our practices and our policies, and how we can remove some of the administrative burdens on on those providers who are continuously in compliance with both our regulations and our policies for contractors. But first, I want to back up and review the roles for each of these groups so that we can start off with a little bit of context. The sole purpose of the Office of Residential Child Care is to make sure a facility that seeks to do business in the state of Georgia meets a minimum set of standards. Those standards demonstrate that it can adequately serve the population they seek to house and care for. This includes an evaluation of basic factors that demonstrate the administrative and financial viability of an organization, the absence of a criminal background for the owner and the employees of this organization, the existence of policies and procedures that guide the agency's handling of the services that it seeks to provide, and as well as the plants or the physical plant. Now, once that facility meets licensing requirements, it starts with a desk review. Then there's an initial licensure visit. Once it's deemed to meet those regulations, then it will be issued a preliminary license. RCC would then follow back up with a visit in 6 months to see if it's continuing to meet those standards. And within a year, it would get what's called a continuing license. From that point on, RCC would then review the agency once a year or based on a complaint or an incident investigation. Now, this annual visit is unscheduled, but every year it comes within a month of the previous year's visit. You have in your folders a list of statutes that guide the work of RCC. I believe it's the first page on the right. Now, once those facilities demonstrate that they can continually meet the minimum standards set by the state, they're then free to seek contracts with referral services such as DFACS or DJJ. DFAC specifically contracts with agencies based on its need to provide room, board, and watchful oversight to children in foster care. About 45% of the children in DFAC's custody are placed in one of these facilities. And these facilities that DFAC's contracts with make up about 50% of the approximately 300 licensed facilities in the state. Now, while RCC sets a minimum set of standards, OPM decides whether or not it wants to do business with that agency. These providers that DFACS works with accept the terms of a contract that may be over and above the terms of their RCC license, and they agree to provide an environment that keeps children safe and caters to their specific medical, educational, or behavioral needs. Once a contract is approved, DFACS then continues to monitor the facility's operations, ensuring both contract performance standards and quality of care expectations are met. Just like RCC, the Office of Provider Management responds to incidents and complaints based on their severity. And while RCC investigates whether or not these facilities are meeting the terms of their licenses, the Office of Provider Management is making sure that these facilities continue to provide the quality of care that meet the standards of the contract. Now, while these two offices look through slightly different lenses, we have determined some ways to reduce regulatory oversight for those folks who continually demonstrate that they can comply. If you look in your folder on the front right sheet, I believe, there is a list of proposals.
I'm going to just jump in here. But in the folders, there is a list of proposed changes, regulatory changes. If it would be all right with the committee, I'd like to hear from each of the agencies, kind of go through their oversight so that we can understand the context of the changes that you're recommending.
Sure.
Would that be all right with the committee? Because a lot of these acronyms are unfamiliar to me and to others, and so it may be helpful to get familiar with those acronyms and understand.
Trying to figure out RCC.
Yes. So I know that you were kind enough to provide in our folders residential child care. Ms. Winstead's presentation here, it's a colored copy presentation, and it's light blue. And then you'll see the RCC. It's, of course, residential child care. And then, in addition to that, I believe there's also a PowerPoint presentation that you have here, a paper presentation for the from DFACS. So I think those may be helpful to go through those first, and then then we'll talk about the solutions that y'all have come up with.
Okay.
And I don't mean to diminish the hard work that you've already been doing. So thank you. Ms. Winstead, if you go ahead and talk to us about RCC, and then we'll kind of move through them.
Okay. Okay, so basically RCC, like Ashley said, licenses and investigates complaints of rule violations at licensed facilities. That entails recording and observing and interviewing and inspecting the physical plant, and correcting by having the surveyor identify any deficiencies, and then a plan of correction is requested from the facility for any deficiencies that are cited, And then the surveyors ensure that the agency has completed the correction of deficiencies, either by reviewing that plan of correction if the rule violations are at a certain level, or by conducting a follow-up visit if the citations rise to a level that warrants that. We have 31 staff in the RCC section. 16 of those are field surveyors. One of them is an application specialist. 2 of them are triage in the triage unit, which basically the triage unit is the unit that when a complaint comes in, either self-reported as an incident from an agency or a complaint from outside of the provider, that complaint goes into a mailbox called the RCC Reports mailbox, and this team pulls those off the mailbox, reads them through, evaluates them, does any follow-up questions with the agency that's needed in order to triage it and give it basically a level of whether it needs to be investigated or not. We really only investigate probably less than 30% of the intakes and reports that come into us. So this team basically reviews those to see which ones need to be investigated and also assigns them to the surveyors. Then we have 3 supervisors, one of them that supervises those triage, and then 2 of them that supervise our field staff. We have a training and policy specialist who does the training, keeps the policies updated, an operations analyst who basically manages our database system, and a financial manager, a business generalist, which is basically our admin, and then 1 legal counsel representative. The next slide on the PowerPoint is some of the RCC numbers. During the fiscal year of 2014, there were 27 adverse actions issued during the year. There were 714 complaints or incidents, which again, the difference between a complaint and an incident is an incident is self-reported by the provider. We conducted 289 relicensure visits. We made 470 CPS referrals, and we assigned 629 intakes that were received. Is everybody good? Okay. Child Protective Services, sorry. That's
And child placing agencies are those that are providing foster homes, is that correct?
correct. Child placing agencies provide the foster care and the adoption, and the CCIs are the child caring institutions, which the general public thinks of as group homes. And then we also have maternity homes, outdoor child caring programs, and we have 1 category that we don't currently have any providers in, which is the CTCC, which is a Children's Transitional Care Center. It was developed for medically fragile children, but I think there were issues with Medicaid reimbursement for those facilities, so we don't currently have a provider in that.
Representative Oliver?
Mr. Chairman, I'll hold my questions if you're like, because I think where my inquiry is going to be is what you do residential and what you do programmatically. And do you want me to hold that?
I think if you have questions to understand what her presentation is, please ask them. If we want to get into, I think it's better just to ask the questions.
300 facilities. How many of them, if any, are used by DJJ or other mental health, the Department of Behavioral Health?
RCC doesn't maintain that number because we don't see them any different. We regulate them all the same. It doesn't matter if they take private, if they take DJJ, if they take DFACS, or a combination of them.
That's really my question. So from DJJ's perspective, they don't do any licensure or inspection. They just choose to place a child with an entity that you are approving. Is that accurate?
I would really need DJJ to answer.
I'm trying to
that.
figure out what the coordination is in and among.
Yeah, I know DJJ investigates complaints at facilities, and I know DJJ participates. We have a monthly meeting that DJJ, Department of Family and Children's Services, and myself participate in, where we talk about facilities and problems or issues or.
What I'm assuming, maybe this is a better way to ask some question. What I'm assuming is that some DJJ children are mixed in as crossover children in these child care facilities, and some from mental health. And now that we have AmeriCare and the new Medicaid provider that is also providing some independent Medicaid funding for hospital-based stays, that all these children from different agencies are all being licensed only by you. I want to make sure I'm right about that.
Correct. We are the only licensing
I think,
authority.
And I think another way to say it is that children that are taken in by the state are not being placed in a facility that's not otherwise licensed by RCC.
I want to make sure there's not duplicate licensure. That's really what I'm getting at.
No, we're the only ones that license all of those programs.
But DJJ is making complaints if one of their child is beat up by another child.
We can highlight some of the oversight that we do have from the exit licensing standpoint. That's all. All I do is that we offer through licensing.
And the 400 CPS complaints, 470 CPS complaints from your 300 facilities, do you know how many of those are child on child, or how many of them are adult on adult, or how many of them can't be characterized that way?
I don't know.
Do you know how many of them
it's-
confirmed as substantiated?
No, but basically our obligation really ends with making sure that DFACS is aware of, if we get an intake, a lot of times it's already been reported to DFACS.
So it's more the programmatical entity that might have that information about 470 Child Protective Services complaints. I don't want to jump ahead, Mr. Chairman. I'm just trying to figure out who does what.
Let's I think it's a good question just to keep in the back of your mind, and I think that's part of the organizational aspects we're going to have to look at, is the hierarchy, who does what, and that's why I want to try to get their information forward to you, and then that way you can hopefully get the overview, and then once you have the overview, we can start talking about overlap or duplication. The numbers that you have here, though, Ms. Winstead, these are numbers that are reflective of just RCC numbers, or are they reflective of DJJ, DFACS?
No. Those numbers are RCC numbers of how many of our intakes that were sent to RCC, how many of them we read that fell into the category of needing to be reported as a possible CPS case. So they were referred to DFACS, and like I said, they may have already, the provider may have also already self-reported to DFACS, but since we have no way of being sure, we go ahead and report it, and then DFACS is able to determine if they already had the report or not when they receive it.
These 470 are going to be duplicated in other numbers, is what you're telling me. And then I'll hush, Mr. Chairman. One of the things I'm interested in, this is based on Chairman Willard's leadership on this, there's an incident of arrest of foster care children in child placement services that terminates that child's stability. And we have been trying to figure out what happens if a child is arrested, taken to jail, and whether or not there's any programmatical protection of that child or protection of other children, or that's just something that
represent the council and remaining in custody, well, it should be.
it's just something that I wanted to look at based on his leadership on this issue, and may come back to that.
Okay. Please continue.
Okay, so moving on to the actual process, the initial license is the first stage that we come into contact with the providers. They usually make a phone call and ask how to provide services either as a group home or child placing agency. And then there is an orientation that we participate in that's sponsored by Together Georgia, but it has representatives of DJJ, DFACS, Together Georgia, and RCC. That kind of just gives an overview of what it is that they're getting into or pursuing to make sure they have the details on that. And then once they decide that they do want to proceed with an application, then they get in contact with our applications person. And our applications person reviews their policies and procedures, which could be several manuals, depends on the provider. But once they review that paperwork, there'll be some correspondence back and forth between the applicant and the reviewer. And she'll ask for information that's missing, but then once it's determined to be a complete application, it's forwarded on to a field surveyor to either go out and visit the facility if it's a CCI or group home, or they'll have the initial visit at the office if it's a child placing agency, because there's not a physical plant that we have to look at in that scenario. The initial license is the only license inspection that is announced. We do schedule that first visit with the provider to make sure that they can have their key staff there for the initial license. Then once they have the initial license, if they're only utilizing private placements, then they would start getting placements. If they were planning on utilizing DFACS or DJJ, they would start pursuing the contract with those agencies. We would make a monitoring visit in 6 months, like Ms. Fielding stated. That's just kind of to check on things and have the agency or CCI not get too far into the process of making errors. Like, for example, if they started some home studies, we might look at some of their initial home studies to make sure they're on track rather than waiting for the license to expire at the end of the year. So it's really just a checkup to let them know how they're doing. Then at the end of that first year, that's when an assessment is made as to how many citations were made and what kind of citations were made. We do actually give each of our citations a scope and severity level, which is kind of rating how serious it is. There's an enforcement matrix in your folder that kind of describes that, and I'd be happy to go over that later. But basically, we give each citation a scope and severity level. And if the citations are all minimal and on that ABC level, then we would go ahead and issue a continuing license to that facility. If they're not ready for a continuing license, we would put them on a second temporary license for another year. The maximum we're allowed to give is 2 years of temporaries. So we do provide them with any technical assistance they need to be sure they get on a continuing license before the end of that second year, if necessary. But most of the facilities don't have a problem moving on to the continuing license. We also inspect foster homes. That is done. We either do 5% or 10% for each licensed child placing agency, and it's whichever is greater. Typically, it ends up being about 10 foster homes per licensed agency. Those are also required to be unannounced. So those are very difficult. Like what was mentioned earlier, we do have foster parents at Little League or things like that they're doing after school. So those are a little more difficult to complete, but if we're not able to do it after 2 attempts to make them unannounced, then we start working with the agency to find out if they have a visit planned that we can tag along on or something to still make it unannounced, but easier to work into the schedule of the family.
Let me interrupt you there, Ms. Winstead.
I'm
Representative Oliver.
assuming that you don't, and this correct me because I'm a little confused, you don't inspect individual family foster care homes that are recruited and overseen by DFACS, that what you're talking about now, foster care homes, is only those that are subcontractors of other licensed child entities.
That is correct.
Okay. And how many of those are family foster care, individual children, individual family foster care home versus institutional where there's 6 or 12 or however many more? Do you know?
Well, I don't know what the total is because I'm not good at quick math, but we did, we had to do 451 successful visits of doing 10 visits per year, and there's close to 90 CPA agencies, but probably only about half of those have foster home visits to visit. So I'm not sure what the number is of how many. I could get that. I have that back at the office of how many total foster homes were reported to us, because the child placing agencies, we required that during the relicensure visit, they give us the number of foster homes that they have so that we could figure out what the 10 or 5%, which one is going to be greater. So I do have that information back at the office.
That might be helpful. Just the numbers, how many of them, of the 300, how did the 300 break down? Or how many are RCC, how many are CCI, only 2?
Very, very few are CCI foster homes. We only have like maybe 2, maybe we might be down to only 2 CCIs that also do foster care.
And this will be a final question. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Last time we had a presentation from a gentleman who was over an organization for emergency shelters, and he said I think he said he had about a dozen statewide. I can't figure out. I'd never heard of that emergency shelter as an independent license. Are they included under your 300 here?
Emergency shelters used to be a chapter within our child caring institutions. Anybody who cares for 6 or more residents is required to be licensed by the state of Georgia, licensed by RCC. So if they care for 6 or more and any of those children are under the age of 19 years old, then they're required to be licensed. Several of them categorize their services as emergency shelter or emergency placement services, but they're still categorized as a child caring institution if they're properly licensed.
Thank you.
Is that Ms. Chandler? Representative Chandler? Oh, no. Representative Tanner.
I think you gave us this number earlier, but what's the percentage of children that are in foster care that are placed in a group home or placed through this independent placement service versus the traditional DFACS community foster home? Do you know that number? Was it 45? So 45 are in either a group home or in independence. Okay, thank you.
And what percentage of them are in family foster care homes under the licensures of RCC?
I'd say about 30% are in family foster homes.
So the math is 30% or 45% of
45%. So the majority of them are going to be placed in family foster homes. I think our group home placements probably account for about 18% of our kids.
When you say our kids, which kids?
DFACS.
Okay. So 18% of DFACS kids are in group homes?
Correct.
And then the remainder is in family foster care?
In DFACS, county foster homes, private agency or child placing agency foster homes with relatives or other arrangements, but they're going to be lesser numbers.
how I've always understood this, which could be wrong, is family foster care, the child that is not in need of any intensive therapeutic services. Traditional family foster care is about 70 to 75% of the children, and 25% or so of the children are in need of more significant therapeutic placement type services. Is that still an accurate breakdown?
We actually have therapeutic foster homes. Now, and let me clarify that. It's not therapeutic in that the therapy and the placement are combined, but we have foster parents who are being supported to a level that they are able to have children in their homes that have a high degree of mental health or behavioral needs. So every child, just because they're not your typical child, doesn't need to be placed in a group home. It just depends on the level of support that we can give to a foster parent, whether they're a child placing agency foster parent or a DFACS foster parent. But we absolutely try to keep them in a family foster home setting because that is the least restrictive and most appropriate environment.
So the percentage of children that are in a higher level of therapeutic oversight, whether it's family foster care, which is your preference, or institutional group home care, is what percentage of the total 8,000?
So our highest level children have a program designation that we call Maximum Watchful Oversight, or MWO. And I would estimate that maybe 150, 200. MWO is a program designation level that we have to approve at the state office.
It's a hospital. What's the hospital?
No, it's not a hospital. A hospital is not a placement. A hospitalization is, whatever we would have if we went to a hospital. That's not where we live.
Inner Harbor is what?
Say again?
Inner Harbor is what?
CCI. They have a CCI.
But
so
they also have a hospital.
They have both.
Component. They have both, so that's the difference. Devereaux has both, so it's you have a PRTF, which is Psychiatric Residential Treatment Facility.
What if they stop using acronyms?
Yes, I'm sorry. We'll try.
Yep.
So you have a child care institution and you have a psychiatric residential treatment facility. So that's considered your hospital, that psychiatric residential treatment facility. And youth villages could have both. Or
So
Devereaux would have both.
I promise this. I'm trying to understand.
That's what you said before.
I know, I promise. What percentage of your children are what you term typical, okay, in a family foster care home, and what percentage of your 8,000 children need more intensive services?
Can we do, can I interrupt and just say this? You have a ranking system, correct, for children that range, I think it's 4 or 5 different categories. Okay. Would it be helpful then to try to break down the numbers based upon the ranking system that DFACS uses?
It would, because I'm trying to figure out all of this oversight is for what percentage of the children. That's
Right.
what I'm getting
It's
to.
for the 45% that are placed in child caring institutions or child placing agencies. So it doesn't matter the level of need if they are placed in a private agency facility, being the institution, or a private agency foster home. They get the same level of scrutiny. So it's not about the child's needs. It's about the agency not being, the placement not being a DFACS run placement.
I'm interested in the child's needs.
So let's do this. How many children total do we have regulatory oversight over?
8,500.
Is it 8,500 or is it not?
About 8,500.
8,500. Okay, so out of the 8,500, 45% of that is handled by DFACS. Is that correct?
No.
85%, 85,000 are currently in DFACS custody.
Okay.
8,500. Out of the 8,500,
Right.
45% are in a child caring institution or a child placing agency that
Okay.
is licensed by RCC.
And where's the remaining 55%?
Family care.
And DFACS foster homes
And how many of
or,
those?
or relatives out of the 45 minus 55. 55% will be in, of the 8,500 will be in DFACS foster homes or relative placements.
And of the 45%, some percentage of those children are in very intensive, high-level therapeutic hospital-type placements, and some of those children are in what looks more or less like a traditional family foster care with some supports.
Yes, yes. I think what you're asking is that 45% breaks down to having children that are currently placed in group home type settings, which are child care institutions. We have about 1,300 or so foster families that are contracted through CPAs, our child placement agencies, and then we have the psychiatric residential facilities, which are not placements, but also have children that are currently placed there that we're looking to step down to either child care institution or child foster home, which is the least restrictive.
What's new to me is what you're telling me is that more children are now under CCI and residential placement than were previously, and of the 1,300 family type foster care in the 45%, that's a range of services there. Could be sort of light oversight through a private agency, or could be more intensive therapeutic support. Is that sort of accurate?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Chairman Nelson.
I want to ask a quick question. Did I understand that you said the same rules apply to whether they're to all these group homes, whether they're Devro or wind shape, the same rules apply? Did I hear you say that?
Let me just clarify that just a bit. What I was trying to say was that the child's program designation, if they have a base program designation, it doesn't mean that we're not, OPM is not going to do oversight of that facility because the children have base needs. So we monitor every bit of those 45% of those placements, okay? However, based on the child's program designation, if there's a contract with that provider, let's say they only take the maximum children, then our standards will be a little bit different. For example, the child to staff ratio would be based on the children's program designations. And so when we go out to monitor, we're going to look to make sure that they are meeting the child to staff ratios based on the program designations of those particular children. Whereas with let's say a base provider, the child to staff ratio might be 1 to 10. So we will be looking at different things, but we're still going out to do an annual comprehensive. We're still going out to do safety reviews. And it's the number of times that we go out, it's more based on the number of children rather than the program designations of the children.
Well, I don't know why this sticks in my mind, but like 2 weeks ago, somebody pointed out about keeping shampoo locked up. I don't know if you remember that, and I can see how in some group homes you would, if it was a psychiatric group home, or whether we had a lot of psychiatric homes, you would, but just, that's just part of living, is knowing how to regulate shampoo.
Thank you. Yes, you did hear that, and basically, here's the reason why. We do have a rule in our minimum rules and regulations that says that all hazardous items will be kept away from children. And so because of that rule and because of a history, even not in hospitals, but in the child caring institutions and foster homes, unfortunately, we have had children drinking mouthwash, drinking perfume, drinking other items, using aerosol cans to get high.
Have you had any drinking shampoo?
No, we haven't had shampoo, but the mouthwash got me.
Well,
so did the drinking perfume.
The mouthwash was a little different, but I think if you surveyed America now, somebody living in a normal home now, you would find shampoo in the shower. I don't think you can find too many homes that don't have shampoo in the shower.
Right. You would probably also find perfume and aerosol hairsprays in a lot of homes. But
but I mean, I think you can, we want them to know how when they get in the shower. We want personal hygiene to be something that they used to, and I think that's part of teaching somebody to live in a normal environment.
And we looked at that based on those concerns and comments that were made. We looked at how many times that was cited in the past year and a half, It's been cited 5 times.
That they didn't have it locked up.
Correct. So of personal items, but a couple of those included the colognes, and some of them were more like your toothpaste or your soap. So what we're doing is we're looking more closely at those 5 times that it was cited and trying to see if there's number one, whether it was appropriately cited, and number 2, whether if they were all appropriately cited, if there's another way to look at that.
I think what the chairman's getting at is that the idea of having a rule that applies to shampoo, mouthwash, and basic personal hygiene items is it seems a little bit over the top. So that I think that's the concern is. So, but let me go on. There's more people that have questions. Chairman Willard. Okay, Representative Chandler. Let me turn your mic on again. If you'll push the button, I'll. Okay, there you go. There it goes.
A couple of maybe just comments. I can understand the aerosol spray cans. I can understand mouthwash and perfumes because I know kids get high off of some of those products. But shampoo, I've never known of anybody to use shampoo to get high. So that just seems a little, maybe I'll use the term crazy to me because I don't understand it. Another comment, it would be very helpful to me to have these numbers that you all have thrown out in writing so I could see them, please. Thank you.
Representative Tanner.
I've got 2 questions, but I want to make a comment about the shampoo. I ran a jail for a long time and had a lot of inmates and saw them do a lot of things. So we had specific shampoos and toothpaste that they could purchase off commissary. I'm assuming that you do have certain types of shampoo, certain types of toothpaste that are allowed to be out. Is that correct?
That is correct. Basically, as long as it didn't have a label of keep out of reach of children are the times that we would cite it. And we have told facilities that there are mouthwashes and things that don't have that alcohol content that they could purchase and still let the residents use to get around that. But still, we want to look at the times that it was cited and see if there's other things that we could do.
Thank you. And then a couple of questions so I make sure I understand this. Out of the 55% that are not in group homes or not in independent placement services, does the local caseworker in the local DFACS office that's handling the case approve the relative? I know that you have a process and a policy you go through. If some my cousin's daughter's taking away and I'm offering my services to let her come live in my home, you come out and do a site visit, you do other things. Is that approved ultimately by the caseworker?
Yes.
And then if there's not a relative that's suited and the caseworker makes that determination and it's going to be placed in a foster home in the community, who initially approves the foster home that takes DFACS kids? Is that done at the local DFACS office or is that done at the state level?
That's handled in the county office.
So they approve those, and I'm assuming there's a whole separate list of policies and things they look at to determine if that can be approved.
Yes, it's the same list that the private agencies utilize. Private agencies that contract with DFACS are required to follow the same approval policies that our county offices do.
And that's done through the local office, though?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I got one more quick question. You said if it had a warning, keep out of reach of children. Do you have any children in group? Most of those said if they're under 3. Do you have any under 3 in group homes?
Predominantly, no. There's some with a waiver under 3, but no.
Thank you.
All right, go ahead, Ms. Winstead.
Okay, so another area that there seemed to be some confusion from the last hearing was as it relates to the difference between a refutation and the appeal process. Those are actually two completely different processes. So I want to explain to you what the refutation process is. We had, many years ago, maybe about 10 years ago, we explored, we were getting a lot of feedback from what Together Georgia is now, used to be Georgia Association of Homes and Services, of inconsistencies with surveyors and how they interpret things, and that certain rules they felt were being cited without validity. So we looked at that and we tried to think of a way where we can try to assess surveyor consistency and be better with that. And we checked other states, and we didn't find any other states that had what we're calling a refutation process, but we decided to put it into place anyway. So basically what the refutation process is, when we do a survey, at the end of each survey, the surveyor is supposed to be conducting an exit interview with the provider. The purpose for that exit interview is so that the provider can correct anything right there on site that's being cited that they know is erroneous. For example, if a surveyor said, you know, I didn't see any assessments in any of your folders, sometimes it's possible that a particular provider calls it something else and it doesn't look like what most assessments look like to that surveyor, so sometimes they can identify what they're calling their assessment in the file. And that gives the surveyor and the provider an opportunity to make sure that citation is correct before they put it down. So we do the exit interview at the end of the survey. But then the surveyor goes back and writes up the survey with detail about what specifically was wrong and what records were during the physical plant inspection. And they give their specific findings. And then they send out the survey along with a request for a plan of correction. And in that cover letter, where it tells them that a plan of correction is needed within 10 days for any citations that are rated a B or higher, then in that letter it also explains the refutation process. If they feel like, if the provider feels like there was a citation made that isn't valid for whatever reason, either like let's say, for example, they say that they were cited for the goals of the child not being measurable, which is one of the requirements in the rules. Let's say the provider says that, you know, I disagree, these are very measurable, this is how we measure them, and they want to refute that citation, they send in the plan of correction, and then on that plan of correction they indicate which rules they're refuting, and they provide any documents that they feel show that actually that rule should not have been cited. And we have a separate committee within our office, within RCC, that reviews those. They look at the information that was cited by the surveyor, and they look at the information that was provided by the provider and what the rule actually requires. And then they make a decision on whether the refuted rule is going to be affirmed, or whether it's going to be deleted, or whether it's going to be revised. And we've been doing that for a while. During 2014, we had we had 61 rules that were refuted out of, there were 2,177 total citations of all the surveys that we did in that year. And of those 2,177, 61 of those were actually, the PowerPoint says 69, but when I did the math, I didn't do the PowerPoint, but when I did the math, I came to 61. So we're going to go with 61 for now. But of those 61, only 13% of those were changed due to surveyor error. However, in years past, that number started at somewhere around 50-something%. And I have gotten feedback from meetings with Together Georgia when we meet with them that providers have seen improvements in surveyor consistency. But the whole reason we do the refutation process is so that we look at those then, and we look at, number one, is it typically the same surveyor who's doing sites that end up getting changed or reverted? And if so, then they need some additional training. Or is it a particular rule that is not being overturned, not being deleted or revised, but it continues to be questioned as far as refuted? And if so, sometimes that is a training need for providers of what it is we're actually looking for to try to help them stay in compliance with that particular rule. Sometimes it's that, it's not clear what we're looking for that particular rule. So with that, it has improved dramatically over the years, the surveyor consistency. And again, only 13% were changed due to surveyor error, but there were some changed. So that's the refutation process. So that one is strictly a voluntary process that we put in place ourselves to kind of help with things. The appeal process, on the other hand, is a process that is the right of a provider when a enforcement action is taken. So if we do an enforcement action against a provider and they want to appeal that enforcement action, they have the right to do that. And when we send the enforcement action out to them, we spell out to them the process to file an appeal if they want to file an appeal. Now, usually when that's done, we try to have what we call a settlement conference and get together with the provider and kind of talk about why it is that we took the action, why it is that we cited the rule, and what their issues were. Most of the time, I don't think we went to any hearings in fiscal year 2014. So most of the times we're able to settle the discrepancies.
Yes. If you'll turn your mic on.
Is that meaning that the other side accepts the fact that there's been a finding by the agency of a violation and they admit they're having done the transgression?
Most of the time, yes.
Sometimes. Most. Is there times when they don't?
I'm
what I'm asking about here, I guess, is when they do not accept it, is it just because, well, is it fruitless to try and carry on an appeal of it for lack of either funding, the legal process, or the feeling that the outcome is not going to change?
I mean, I get the impression from those conferences when they're talking that most of the time it is a misunderstanding of what it was that was actually being cited, or why it is that we have the rule, or just their attempt to see what kind of evidence or findings we have to support the citation. But there have also been a couple of times when we either revise some of the verbiage, or we agreed that, okay, yes, this citation maybe is duplicative of that one, and we agreed to delete one of the enforcement action citations, and they agree to proceed with paying the fine of the ones that they do admit that were wrong.
May I follow, Mr. Chairman? I guess what we're trying to find out is the basis that they come to the point of saying, I want to appeal. Maybe you have the conference to get it resolved. That's hopefully the acceptance of it. But I wonder what is the backup. What I'm reading from the prior testimonies we have from the agencies, a lot of times they just feel it's fruitless to try and appeal to a decision. You know, why waste my time because the outcome's not going to change? And maybe you're right in the beginning, but I wonder if there is also the appropriate due process is in place to, because they're going to be fined, are they not, on these occasions generally?
Well, if they appeal it, it goes to a judge, administrative law judge, so.
Well, I know, but after the administrative law judge, it's then reviewed by the director, correct?
You're talking about
Ultimately.
if that's appealed, if you're talking about if the decision is appealed?
Yes, ma'am.
Right, and then they could go to Superior Court.
I guess what I'm trying to.
I think we're having our legal counsel
Good,
come up
okay,
to help.
okay. I guess we're as a committee want to be sure there's appropriate due process in place, and there's a feeling that is in the outcome of it fairness with what's occurred as far as either the penalties, fines, license suspensions for the transgressions involved. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for allowing me to speak on this issue. My name is Pamela Carr-Cosby. I'm an Associate General Counsel for Residential Child Care. First of all, in response to, I believe at the last hearing it was brought up, the issue that the appeals process is lacking. But our appeals process is like no other than is just the same as other state departments covered by OCGA sections 501341 and 501317, which outlines that entire appeals process in the sense that once we issue an intent to impose a fine or to revoke a license or suspend a license, then that party or provider has an opportunity to appeal that decision, and the appeals are heard by the Office of State Administrative Hearings, which of course is an independent body who hears our cases. They issue a decision. It's called an initial decision or referred to as initial decision, and either party, whether that's RCC or the provider, has the opportunity to seek an appeal reviewer decision. The appeals reviewer is appointed by our commissioner, and that person does not have contact with the case and basically issue an opinion regarding, sometimes the opinion is that RCC is right, sometimes the provider is right. So we've lost some at the appeals reviewer level, and we've won some at the appeals review level. But regardless, as Carol indicated, of whether this is there is no right to that settlement conference. It's just something that we do as an extra precaution to make sure that the provider is actually understanding the rules and why they were cited, and basically to see if we can basically resolve the issue. The hearings are still scheduled or are still on the judge's calendar, so they're not taking off the calendar until we actually consent, whether there's a consent agreement or whether or not they withdraw their request for a hearing. And I can tell you that in the last 5 calendar years, there have been no judicial petitions for judicial review, meaning that after they have that final administrative opinion, then they of course are allowed to seek review in the Superior Court. We have had none of those. As far as the 2013 calendar year, we initiated 30 adverse actions. This is the calendar year. And of those, we had only 2 requests for an administrative hearing. And those 2 administrative hearings were withdrawn by the provider, and our adverse action was enforced. And in those, of course, we met with them, and hopefully they understood the violation. As far as knowing or having an idea as whether or not they don't want to pursue it because of funding, I really do not have that idea, but basically that process is in place for them to take advantage of.
So you feel what we have in place with the agency is appropriate levels of due process?
I do, and I believe it's very adequate.
We got totally confused last time about whether or not there was an independent APA review, and you've clarified that. There is an independent APA review. Do you regard the refutation process, the exit interview process, the plan of correction as all essential administrative actions that the provider has to follow? They have to exhaust those administrative remedies before they go to a hearing, or can they just ask for a hearing immediately?
Well, actually, because the citations that are concerned, that are of concern in the refutation process, they're only citations. They don't rise to the level of an adverse action to where we're imposing some type of sanction.
So your APA review only relates to
sanctions,
yeah, and not published complaints, because the complaints that are set forth in the review are what goes on the website, and if they're not cited, if they're not an adverse action, that public, we found you to be wrong in these 5 ways, you don't have a right to appeal to that.
Right. If they're only citations, not resulting in a sanction.
And you will tell us now or later what's convenient for you. How long does it take to complete all that process before it's over? Either the refutation process or the plan of correction process or the hearing process, because there was a complaint that it took too long, and I'm just curious what your definition is of what all that takes.
Well, and I can tell you that providers have 10 days to request a hearing, so that we're starting at 10 days.
That's only if they're adverse action.
Right. Yeah, only if there's an adverse action. 10 days to request a hearing. We send that information over to the OSA judge within a couple of days. The judge will schedule a hearing date. A lot of times those hearing dates are scheduled.
I got you. I know about that. We're talking about the internal process. Because if there are only 33 adverse actions out of, I forget what number there are, citations, 33 adverse actions, and that leaves 2,000 where there's citations with no adverse action. That probably is where the complaints are. Am I right? Okay.
Well, I don't know if that's accurate as well, because with the refutations, with the number of refutations, it's, see, I mean, we're talking about the calendar year and fiscal year. We can get that information.
Okay, yeah, but you've helped me in that there is an APA review. It's just only on adverse actions, which is about 10 or less than 15% of the citations. I got you now.
Great, thank you.
I wasn't, before you leave, I wasn't clear about when an adverse action is initiated, then internal, before it's heard by the administrative law judge, you have an internal opinion that is written by an independent, or is that just, when you were saying the opinion, you're referring to the ALJ's opinion?
No, sir. What I'm referring to is that we actually invite the providers in, and there's an office conference. There is no opinion in that instance. But with the initial decision of the ALJ can be appealed to our DHS appeals reviewer, who is appointed by the commissioner, and that person issues a decision.
Okay, so we go. So the process is you file a petition for a hearing, that's heard by the administrative law judge, and then after that it goes to a reviewer within the agency.
The aggrieved party can appeal to the appeals reviewer, who is in the agency, who is an independent,
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Let me ask this standpoint, 2 things I guess I want to pursue with you, if I could. What are the numbers that are handled, say, by the administrative law judge that are then brought to review by the commissioner's office that are changed?
Okay. Over the last 5 years, we've had 3 appeals requests to the agency reviewer, and let's see, one was actually, one was overturned in the favor of RCC, and one was basically, I believe the provider actually won at the
at the OSA level, and that opinion was actually affirmed. So we've won some and we've lost some.
Okay.
So.
And then the follow-up is, why do we go through the process of administrative law judge with the need of having that decision finally reviewed by someone interagency, I'll call it?
Well, is my understanding that basically it is based upon sometimes the agency will have a particular set of, will have knowledge of a certain standard that basically is not, and that maybe the ALJ has not considered. And so basically, yeah, and I.
But you have the hearings for.
But,
good lawyers like you would present that information.
Right.
So I'm saying, to me, that would be from after administrative law judge, if you're dissatisfied either side, that should be the place of the time for appeal to a superior court from a writ of cert.
Right.
That's what generally happens. And that's with other agencies now.
And I just know that with ours, it just is considered an initial decision. It's not final, and I'm assuming that I want the department to have that final say. And again, the person does have the opportunity to appeal to the Superior Court at that time. So.
Representative Tanner.
I just wanted, I guess, to make a comment for you to think about.
Sure.
Prior to having the website, these providers just getting a citation probably wasn't considered by them necessarily to be adverse. But from what we heard 2 weeks ago, the website and being able to raise money and to support the homes through the community does cause them, at least, I think, an adverse action, even though it's not necessarily a sanction. So I would just encourage you to think about ways to make sure that they had a good process, and I know you've got the refute, but a good process to clear those up if they don't feel like those were done correctly. You maybe don't go to the administrative law judge, but I am concerned that is creating a reputation issue for them in their communities. So, thank you.
If I might, I really do appreciate you coming. Let's take a 10-minute break and be back here in 10 minutes, and then from there I'd like to move on to DFACS and try to hear from DJJ today as well. Thank you. We have a PowerPoint presentation from DFACS I think we'll move on to, and trying to be respectful of everyone's time. And I think if we have additional questions for RCC, then I think what we can do is if those questions can be directed to the chair, then I'll try to get those answers from RCC for the committee as a whole. Ms. Winston, thank you very much for coming and presenting. I'd like to turn it over at this time and hear from DFACS and OPM. And I believe, Ms. Stokes-Bryan, you are here today to try to educate us on DFACS's role. If you would, go ahead.
Okay, my name is Catricia Stokes-Bryan, and I'm the Director with Office of Provider Management. And as you'll see in the PowerPoint, the Office of Provider Management contracts with and monitor RBWO, which is the Room, Board, and Watchful Oversight services for children in foster care. So once they receive the license from RCC, our job is to issue a contract and monitor those providers. At the time of this presentation, we had 179 child care institutions that we were contracted with, along with 71 child placing agencies. Those numbers change daily based on providers that are looking to obtain a contract with us. Our fundamental objective is to ensure that children placed with these agencies are safe from abuse and neglect. So again, our ultimate goal is to ensure that we're monitoring those providers that we're contracting with. OPM provides adherence to RBWO, or Room, Board, and Watchful Oversight minimum standards. And we have a book of standards that we provide to all of our agencies that we're contracting with to ensure that they are following and meeting the contractual obligations and in compliance with the safety, permanency, and well-being of children that are currently in care. I continue to say that our ultimate job is to monitor these providers and make sure that they're providing good oversight for the children that are placed with them. Our other responsibilities include the management of risk, that's identifying, tracking, and addressing safety issues, educating providers. We have a department within the Office of Provider Management where we have 2 individuals responsible for training, providing a level of training to the human service professionals, I can't think of the word I'm looking, case support workers and case support supervisors. So those individuals provide training within the Department of OPM. Those individuals are providing training to child care and institutions and child placing agency staff that are providing direct service to the children. And we evaluate provider performance through what we consider performance-based placement agreements, what used to be considered performance-based contracting, but now we look at it from a performance-based placement perspective, because the ideal is that as providers continue to do well performance-wise, that children will be placed with those providers based on their performance. The next slide that was provided to you all is kind of a breakdown.
Just one question real quick. When you say based upon their performance, who are we talking about?
The child placing agencies and the child care institutions. And the performance-based placement, this is a very general overview, but what we're looking at is for a CPA, child placing agencies that have foster homes that they have contracted with. We look at those individual foster home records and complete a desk review. And based on the DFACS policy, our RBW, yes.
So she's on the page with the circles.
He's on. And so the CPA foster home qualitative review, study reviews, that's us sitting doing a desk review, looking at the home study that was completed by the private agency, and just making sure that that home study and all the requirements, the safety checks were completed to approve this actual home. And they get a grade and a score of that. From that, we also provide comprehensive reviews, which are annual reviews that are announced to the provider once a year, and that produces a score based on all the checks to ensure that providers are in compliance with the minimum standards. So we're taking the qualitative foster home studies, the comprehensive reviews, and then provide a self-reported information. We have a database where providers are allowed to self-report things as it relates to school enrollment, family visits, child visits, doctor's appointments, things of that nature, to ensure that they are actually reporting information that's required by whether it's DFACS policy or the RBW minimum standards. So we're taking all those scores, adding that information up to produce their PBC score, their PBP score, and then providers get a score, and then they're ranked from A to F, and in most cases, providers, what we're hoping, are scoring between above 70%, 70 out of 100, to ensure that we're continuing to place children with them and for them to maintain that contract with us. So the performance-based placement score, again, is the ideal behind that is to ensure that DFACS case managers are placing with providers who are performing the best and maintaining a score of 70 or above. The next to the last slide is what we're looking at from a contract deliverables and RBWO minimum standards. So once again, we're looking at the annual comprehensive review that's completed. That's an announced visit to review staff records, the child records, physical plant, staff, child, physical plant. I think that's about it. School records, things like that, everything that encompasses the placement of that child. So that's the annual comprehensive review. It's an overall assessment of that provider's performance in the areas of safety, permanency, and well-being. We also complete safety reviews. Those safety reviews are unannounced visits, and that's a point-in-time visit that shouldn't take any more than 60 to 90 minutes, and we're going in to assess the safety of the children that are placed, whether it's in a foster home or CCI on any given time. Those are randomly frequent visits based on the number of children placed, based on the number of foster homes that are currently there. The annual comprehensive review is a scheduled visit with the provider. They know when we're coming. They are aware of all the documents that we're going to review, everything that we're looking for, the children that we're going to want to speak with if need be. For safety reviews, unannounced and very randomly selected, and again, a point in time based on what's going on, and just to ensure that children are safe when we're there. qualitative foster home study reviews or desk reviews. That's what I talked about previously. We're looking at the safety checks and the home study that was done by the CPA for their contracted foster homes to ensure that they've gotten all the necessary background checks, they've done all the necessary checks, and that they completed a thorough assessment of this family prior to placing children. And then the performance-based score verification audit, we try to do those in conjunction with the annual comprehensive or with the safety review, so that when we're out, we're just verifying the information that the provider self-reported. So if the provider is self-reporting data, we're just verifying what they've actually put into the system and stated during that time. So whether it's the number of staff that this staff had, the required number of training hours, we're just verifying when we're out there to determine if the training hours were actually reflected in the staff training record. So again, just a verification process. In 2013, Office of Provider Management conducted 214 annual comprehensive reviews, and as you'll see, that number coincides with the PVP verification numbers as well. The safety reviews were 638 reviews that were conducted. Those are the unannounced visits, whether to a foster home or to a CCI, a child caring institution, and 310 foster home study evaluations, desk reviews that were completed where we did not have to go out to the agency. So in most cases, the foster homes, the annual comprehensive were done on all providers for that year, which were the 214, because every provider gets one, whether it's a CCI or CPA, as long as they have a contract with the Office of Provider Management, they're going to get an annual inspection that's announced. And those 638 include, again, foster homes and or the child caring institutions that are unannounced visits.
Would you explain the Georgia score, please, to us?
Georgia Score is a system that's currently used by private providers to enter their data into the system on staff reporting and provider reporting. It's the system that was created specifically for providers to use to report their information. It's not child-specific information because that information is placed in Shines, but it's more specific for the provider and their reporting to manage their individual their agencies, whether it's a foster home and or child caring institution.
Who all reports into the Georgia scorecard? This is a scorecard that you can see to rank the various providers to see how they're doing.
All the private providers, anyone that has a contract with Department of Human Services or RBWO contract, that has a contract with Office of Provider Management to provide room, board, and watch for oversight, they're required to report into that system.
Okay, and then does OPM use that? Does OPM use that scorecard to help determine what contracts will be issued or reissued?
That's the goal. Yes, we're because of the minimum number of providers within the state. Sometimes it's hard to hold them to the act. That's why we changed it from performance-based contract, because we recognized that there were certain providers that needed more technical assistance, needed more support, so we just didn't want to terminate their contract, but offer some assistance around performance so to ensure that they're performing better. So I would say that the goal is to ensure that those providers who are not performing well, we place them on some level of suspension, change the type of children that they may receive. However, we don't want to just jump straight to terminating their contract, because there may be a need for more assistance around what they're doing.
And what other agencies can utilize Georgia Score?
Currently, DJJ can utilize Georgia Score, and we are working to talk with, and we're in communications with RCC to collaborate on our efforts to streamline some of the reporting processes so that providers can report there one time and we can all benefit from that.
Would it be helpful also to have any of the information from DPH that's collected on the kitchen inspections, the health inspections? Could that be integrated also in Georgia Score?
I think it would be helpful. I think it would be great. I don't think it's something we've looked into long-term, but I definitely think it's another piece of information we would love to know and how they're performing, especially if they have kids, 13 or more kids, and they are providing food services and have kitchens, yes.
Chairman Houseman.
You spoke about a book of standards.
Yes.
Okay, is the book of standards the same as this book of rules that you have, or is it a different book?
It's a different book. We've tried to align our standards with.
It's not this book.
It's that book, yes.
And that's the book of standards.
That's the book of standards. That yellow book is the breakdown of standards, but it's now purple. But that's what but it's a breakdown for the type of providers as well. So it's the different types of providers that are and the types of children. So it's not. It's what we consider kind of the standards, the way of living, and things that we would want all providers to do, the minimum standards, but it's broken down into sections based on safety, permanency, and well-being, reporting requirements, the types of children that are placed at a type of a certain agency, the types of agencies that we're contracting with, so it's all inclusive.
Okay, and then you talk about your rated performance. Do you take into account the educational the things that are offered in different homes when you're doing your and the achievements they have in education, or in your, you said you're talking about the well-being of the child.
Yes.
Safety and well-being. Well, well-being of a child is doing well. To me, a well-being of a child is how they function outside in the real world. Do you take that into account, whether these places are, these group homes are producing children that are well-adjusted? Or?
Yes.
That goes into
that is
it.
Something that we, yes, that's definitely something.
I didn't know
that
what you considered well-being. I consider it well-being, education.
Education is definitely
and
that.
so being able to function socially in society.
Yes, education is something that we definitely look at, and we one of the specific measurements has to do with academic supports and the supports that providers are putting in place, whether it's tutoring, ongoing after-school services, if they're bringing in a tutor, things like that are all considered under that academic supports.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
What is the, well, has OPM ever terminated a contract with a private provider?
Yes.
And what provider was that, or providers?
Most recently, we've terminated a contract with OmniVision, which is a child placing agency.
Okay. And are you able to discuss what the basis of the termination was?
And I would not, I'm sorry.
Okay. That's good enough. Yeah. we don't necessarily adhere to them, but you know.
How many times have y'all had a termination of a license through your process? And let's say, use me say period last 4 years, if you can tell us.
And you're saying contract?
Yes, ma'am. Just give me a range.
Over the last 4 years, where we have taken action to actually terminate a contract?
Yes, ma'am.
I would say maybe once, twice.
It's very rare.
Very rare that we would terminate the contract, because there are so many other things that we can do. And then a lot of times providers tend to not want to contract because of the standards, because of the licensure requirements. So we have, they decide.
What other things can you do?
We can suspend placements, meaning if they are currently having some type of issues and they have 12 kids currently, then we can, but they can take up to 25. We could not allow those additional placements. We can
limit their numbers then?
Yes. We can also, if they are taking the maximum watchful oversight children with the higher needs, we can decide at some point they may not be able to manage those kids based on incidents, based on staffing. So we can approve them for a lower level of child that has needs that are not as high as those what they were currently taking. If they had a mix of kids, we can determine at some point that that's probably not the best thing as well.
Like male, female mix?
Yes. So there are several different things that we can do, and we try to do to put in place, and as opposed to just terminating their contract. If they were taking 12 kids, approved for 12 kids, we may take them down to 8 kids because we realize that they can manage a smaller number of children. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Representative Oliver.
I used this example last time, so I'll follow up. On your education achievement criteria, do you check to see whether or not every foster care child has a surrogate appointed as required by the federal law of special education services? And follow up on that, do you assure that the IEP is being followed?
That is a responsibility of the county case manager. And as far as the educational surrogates, we try to use the birth parents whenever possible because they can serve as a surrogate. If not, then the foster parent can serve as a surrogate. So we have an educational department at the division, not Katricia's department, but they're responsible for working with DOE, working with the local school systems, and also the county departments to make sure that the children's educational needs are being met.
So there's a variety of ways in which the enforcement of the surrogate, enforcement of the IEP, not necessarily you.
Correct.
When was the Office of Program Management created as a separate entity, separate from the licensure residential services?
We've never been a part of the residential child care. Residential child care reports up to the OIG, whereas OPM reports up to the Division of Family and Children Services. It's had several different names over the years, provider relations. I can't even tell you the number of acronyms that we've had, but although it's called the Office of Provider Management, it's actually a unit under foster care, so that could be a little bit misleading.
In this chart right here, do you consider what Ms. Winstead's reports, are they part of this survey, or is it totally independent licensure review?
Actually, a part of the comprehensive review score asks whether or not there have been any adverse actions from RCC, and that is incorporated into the score.
But y'all have two different oversighting entities. Okay.
Yes.
Back to two specific issues that we've dealt with, talked about in the past. One is, how do you consolidate the requirement of criminal records checks so agencies don't have to do it 5 different times? Y'all are working on that.
We've had discussions around it. However, we share that's definitely something we would like to see happen. However, we recognize that it's a legal issue from an RCC perspective. Ashley, are you trying to say?
I'm really looking for y'all to help us with a solution on that. And secondly, I'm also looking for y'all, I think you, not you, for a solution on this program oversight of how many children are arrested, taken from your facility to jail, and some follow-up on this 470 Child Protective Service complaints.
Just regarding the sharing of criminal background information, we've asked the Georgia Bureau of Investigation to provide a statement for us on that. Again, we share within our agency, but there is a federal law, I believe, that prohibits the sharing in between agencies.
I don't believe that.
But I can provide you with the information that they've provided to us.
But we're going to work on that, right? We're going to challenge that.
Could, Ms. Stokes-Bryan, would you mind explaining to the committee the different classifications or rankings of the children that come in to DFACS, what those acronyms are, and describe them briefly? You had maximum watchful oversight. That's one of them.
Yes.
Could you go through all of them, please?
We have maximum watchful oversight. We have, well, let me start at the bottom, I guess. We have traditional kids that come in. Those are your kids that have minimum needs or requirements as it relates to supervision and so forth. We have a base level child, and we would normally term that BWO, and that's a child that would come in that would have some level of aggression, require a little more supervision. We have additional watchful oversight again, a child that will require an even higher level of supervision, may change in the staffing ratios. The child may have some additional behaviors, need some additional supports. We have our maximum watchful oversight, which again, children that are more severe, have more aggression, may have some school suspensions, may have some supervision issues. For each one of those, which are included in the standards, and the standards that all the providers receive, they then are able to determine the staffing requirements needed for each one of those populations. So say, for instance, our maximum watchful oversight child may require a 1-to-5 ratio. Our additional watchful oversight child may require a 1-to-10 ratio. Base watchful oversight child may require a staffing ratio of 1-to-15. So the severity and the level of supervision and things like that will change based on the needs of that child. We also have specially maximum watchful oversight, and those, then we're looking at children that are medically fragile. So our specially medically fragile watchful oversight children require, again, additional staffing component for children that are placed in child placing agencies. Those foster parents will require additional trainings and additional supports around the type of medical needs of that child, and what's required is also listed in the standards as well. So you can get a child anywhere from a traditional to a specialty child, but it's all broken down based on the child's behaviors and based on the actual needs of that child and or foster parent. And that information, again, is all in the standards, and those are the things that I talked about that we could change based on contractual things. So if a provider initially is contracted to take an MWO child, but it's determined that through the contracting process, through the annual comprehensives, through conversations with the licensure department, through all those conversations and meetings with the provider, we at some point may determine that you're not able to manage that level of child based on your staffing, based on the needs of the child, and we can then change what we're providing, the type of child we're contracting with you for.
Would it be possible to combine your annual inspections with those of RCC?
Yes, what we've been recently talking about, and I think you have a copy of it, is a grid that looks similar to this that we said we'd probably get to at some point. What we've been proposing is Office of Provider Management currently goes out once a year, as well as RCC. We're proposing going out twice a year, once every 2 years. But also, we've in recent talks been really looking at the fact of the kind of what the Department of Public Health suggested, and that is that based on performance, maybe not going out as much, maybe not provide as much oversight, but we still need to provide some level of oversight and really talk through what that would look like. But I think because we use those performance-based scores, and we want to make sure that they have some meat and validity to them, if you're a provider that's doing extremely well, there may not be a need for us to go out as regular, especially if RCC is going out. But what we, as of right now, conversations are, instead of going out once a year, going out every 2 years for our annual comprehensive, and communicating with RCC as they go out once a year for their relicensure visits. And also with our safety visits, instead of doing our safety visits of foster homes, RCC also conducts what they consider visits with their foster homes, as she talked about, either the 10 or the 5%. So if they're doing those visits, then allowing them those visits to count as our visits for safety, unannounced visits, and reducing the amount of times we go out. So we would only go out when there is a crisis or when there is a safety concern, as opposed to just randomly selecting homes and going to visit those. So we have been in conversations about how we can decrease the number of those.
Aside from meetings, do you all have software, a database that allows you to communicate intra-agency or interagency, so that RCC and DFACS, as these inspections are done, that information is then transmitted into a database so that you can see it, and that way, if RCC sees something, an anomaly that occurs within, and you're doing a desk review instead of a site review, you'd be doing a desk review, and that way you could red flag something that needs to be either checked again on a follow-up site visit, or it may be something that alerts you that there's a problem, vice versa. If RCC is inspecting and they identify something that may be problematic to a contract that you have with a provider, is there any form of communication that's internal database driven?
We don't have anything that's database driven right now that looks at that. We have meetings once a month internally, RCC, OPM, and DJJ, where we look at all those providers and issues that they may be having, so we're able to discuss those internally during those monthly meetings. So we have those, that's going on right now. What we have talked about is the calendar, being able to use a calendar system through through Georgia Score, where we can all enter information so we can see the last time RCC went out and see the last time OPM has gone out, and see when DJJ is planning to go out. So we're trying to create that system that will allow all of us to kind of communicate in one location where we can see what's happening, not the actual document and the results of those visits, but at least so that there's some level of communication around when someone is going, so that we're not all trying to go back to back, but we can try to either coordinate some of those visits or at least know when a visit occurred, so that we're not going out the next day after they've just recently gone out.
On the inspections, are there overlaps in terms of, like, I assume you have an inspection form that you're using, and that are there overlaps between DFAS, OPM's inspection forms, and that of RCC?
Yes, there is some overlap, and so that's why we were looking at decreasing the number of times that we go out, and also allowing for some of the RCC visits, meaning those foster home visits that we talked about, to account for the visits that we would normally do, because we recognize that there is some overlap in those visits.
And Ms. Winstead said that there are higher priority items in terms of inspection. There are things that are more critical than others. Does OPM have that a similar level of severity in terms of or importance allocated to various aspects of the inspection?
We don't have all things are looked at equally. We don't have a ranking or severity in how we are looking at things when we go out. When we're looking at from a safety perspective, if we're checking windows, that would equate to checking doorknobs. So those things that we're looking at, if we're talking to a child and his or her ability to feel safe in that home, that's just as equal to, you know, what's going on in the physical plant, the child being able to have a comfortable bed and a place to sleep in that home. So we look at all things equal and make a decision based on what's happening at that point in time when we go out and do that, and that's that safety check.
Is there an appeal process that you have for terminations of contracts? And if so, what is it?
It depends on why the contract was terminated. If it's terminated for convenience, that's written into the contract that we can give you a 30-day notice, and that's actually the clause that we use for the most recent termination, so there's no appeal to that. Okay. And then I would adjust just a little bit Katricia's last comment about the level of importance. With our PBP scoring, different things do carry a different weight, and so a safety issue might be worth 40% of the score, whereas something, you know, lesser, you know, may be worth 10% or 20%. So there is some weighting in the scoring based on importance.
Yeah, and that's where I was kind of going, was to see if you couldn't meld these two inspection reports with RCC and yours. Obviously, you have some tailored contracts that have specialty items that need to be checked on, but it would seem that if you're going to give different weights, that the weights correspond to what RCC is looking at, so that way you're the items, one person can do the inspection essentially for both agencies.
That is what we're looking at, but it's just from I guess a random inspection. What Diane is speaking about has more to do with the chart where we had the slide that had the 3 circles on it. So when we're looking at the provider self-reported information, that's information that's weighted differently. When we're talking about the safety reviews, when we're going out to ensure that a child is safe today at a point in time, then we're looking at specifically what's happening right then and there and just trying to ensure that that child is safe. And so there's no weighing to that information. But yes, we are talking with RCC about how we can combine some of that information and receive and make sure that we're getting the same score and reporting out the same information.
Representative Houston.
When you do a safety check on level of importance, like suppose that they had a balcony upstairs and the railing was loose, and then that would be something wrong. And then you had a light bulb out in a closet. Are those two things rated the same?
I think the concern is that when what I'm trying to
no, but I mean those two things are complete. You know, one is really dangerous, and one, if you went to your house, I'm sure they'd find some light bulbs.
Exactly. Exactly.
And there are different levels of what's wrong.
And I think that's when we talked about, that's what I was explaining earlier about the suspension and things like that, the number of kids that are currently placed. So what will happen is if we go out to a home today and we see that a light bulb is missing, then the provider may get a grade, they're going to get a grade, and the quality of care is probably not of a
so, and the Georgia score, that wouldn't come up. You wouldn't score that.
We will score that. We have a report that...
No, but like a light bulb, you might get a 1, and a balcony, you might get a 10 points. Do you do it like that?
Well, what we do is determine what should happen with this home, period. We're looking at overall if this home is going to be safe for kids to remain in this placement overnight or during that time frame. So yes, if the light bulb is out today, then we're hoping that you can change that while we're there, so that's not even something that's rated. Okay. If the balcony is
so you would not write up somebody that had a light bulb out in a closet?
No, we're not concerned with the light bulb, but I am trying to decide
so
if we
that does not happen?
No, we're not. A light bulb being out is
in a closet does not happen.
I've never known that a light bulb in a closet.
Okay, that's not one of our standards.
Okay, not one of your standards.
I also want to say that in our safety reviews, the document is in two sections. The first section is 10 questions, and one of the questions might be something like, overall, were there any issues with the physical plant? Mm-hmm. Okay, and
so we see some of those?
Absolutely, we can provide you with the form. And so the questions for the safety review are pretty broad based and an overview, because we're only there for about 60 minutes. We're just checking in, so we're not going to be going through and looking for light bulbs and doing the type of white glove inspection that we might do for a comprehensive review.
Okay.
So
I think one thing that Representative Welch pointed out is really bothers me about defects is the lack of the use that we have of computers and the technical data we have to track children, and you know, if you can track a package I mail from Nashville, Georgia, and tell me where it is every time till it gets to Seattle, I don't think we're using technical information or technical data enough. I think that's something we really need to look at, because I know when we have a child missing and the child's been abused, if that child has been abused one time, when somebody calls in and says that child's been abused, a red flag should go up on a computer screen or something to a defects worker to say, hey, look out, something's going on with that child. And I don't think we're using that enough. I don't think we're taking into account all the technology. I don't think we're using technology, I think, as much as we should. And doing this, I think we're going to too much paper. Do you agree? Thank you. That was my statement. I'm sticking to it.
Chairman Miller, thank you. One of the things I've seen in the past with regulatory agencies is the use, when they're regulating others in the private sector, is the use of what I call an advisory board, an advisory panel made up of individuals who are the regulated bodies. And I say this in the sense that would it not be something to be considered by DFACS, especially where you have a number of private providers and have those people give you information of what is from an advisory group, a panel, committee, things where they can help sit down with you and review. They want to have uniformity. I'm sure they want to have it recognized that the bad people got to get out of the business, and assist you in that regard and say, just, here's an advisory group of 7 or 8 people who represent various portions and parts of the industry that you regulate, and just work with you in saying, with either the forms or with the standards that we have, with the light bulb issues or with the railing that's about to fall off, what is the appropriate standards to be applied in that regard, and at least get some input from them that would probably help you as an agency do the job that you need to do with them. I want to say that, closing out, Mr. Chairman, no agency in the state carries a greater responsibility than DFACS does with the needs you have and the job you do, which is the most tremendous job of anybody given by the government. That is taking over the care of other individuals' children. And this old head, for one, commends you and acknowledges the great work that you do. We're not here in any means as a witch hunt. We're trying to find ways that the agency, from an outside perspective, can see if there's some things that might give you better ways of assisting you in your work, frankly. I think the governor's office and the legislative branches have both picked this up as a desire to try and work with you this past year with the things that we see are problems for you. So we do commend your work very much. Thank you.
Representative Tanner.
One of the other things that we heard a couple of weeks ago was the timeliness of the report getting back to the provider, and this may be more of an RCC, I'm not sure, issue, but is there a policy in place that once the surveyor comes out to one of the homes, does their inspection, the turnaround time frame to get that report back to the provider?
Yes, with RCC, there are time frames. They're supposed to get the report to the facility within 30 days of the exit date, which the exit date is basically the date when they've gotten all the information they need to write the survey. With a relicensure, the exit date's typically the same day as the start date or the next day, but with a complaint investigation, for example, they might go out to a facility today to investigate a complaint, but the staff member who was involved in the complaint wasn't working and wasn't on shift on today when they went out, so they may have to go back out next week to interview that staff member. So when they interview that staff member, that would be the exit date. So, but 30 days from when they get all of the information, interviewed all the people that they need, and reviewed the documents, they're supposed to provide the final survey. We've also looked at that internally and are trying to change that to just 45 days from the start date, and to kind of reduce that amount of time that they have to provide that. But we've suffered a great deal of turnover in the past 2 years in residential child care, so I know that they're not hitting even the numbers of 30 days from exit.
It seems like the 30 days sounds good. It just seems like there's a lot of leeway in there. If the person gets busy on another task and doesn't have time to complete an interview, then it could drag out for another 30 days.
That's exactly why we're changing it to 45 days from the start date.
I think that's a good idea, because I can see how that would be frustrating for a provider not to get that feedback in a timely manner when we're requiring them to provide it in a timely manner. All right, thank you.
As a follow-up, on the technology side, have y'all looked at any other states in terms of how they do data sharing, interagency? My question really is there a program that would help in terms of what Representative Tanner was saying, providing the information quickly so that it could be reviewed quickly in a digital form, then it could be emailed back to the CCI for review, and that way you're kind of quick. Your turnaround should be a little bit faster, one would think. Also, going back to what Chairman Houston was saying was having those kind of red alerts that go off that help you to identify this is a child safety issue, this is more of an institutional plant management issue, and make it easier for your field agents to identify potential problems, to alert them to potential problems in a home or in a CCI that could address some immediate response time. I know you already have statutory response times for child abuse reports, but this may be outside of those extremes. It may be somewhere in the middle. Is there software or programs that could help facilitate the communication between agencies? And if so, could you provide that? If you've not looked at it, could someone in the departments look at that to try to provide some feedback to us? And even if there is, the question still remains: would that be helpful? Not saying that it would be or wouldn't be, but not predetermining that question. But if there is, would it be helpful? Could it be utilized as a central warehousing of information, and shared across agencies from DFACS to DJJ to RCC, et cetera?
I think that's really what we're trying to do with the enhancements to Georgia Score. Right now, DJJ has read access to Georgia Score. Residential Child Care has read access as well. OPM posts all of its surveys to Georgia Score, which means that DJJ can read every one. RCC could read every one. So I guess the only thing that we're missing now is to have RCC to post their findings for those particular agencies to Georgia Score, and also have DJJ to do that. But that's not something that we had thought about, having them post their reports, but it's, I think, a very simple fix, because the system is already, it already exists. It is a contract management system, and so that's how OPM manages its work with the providers. But we have been very generous and open to allowing RCC and DJJ to, be a part of that system, and so we're looking to expand that. RCC also emails us every single adverse action. We're in constant communication with RCC as well as DJJ. So there's a lot of communication that goes on. It may not go through a technology system, but the relationships and the partnerships are very strong. I also just want to reflect on what the representative was saying about the provider partnerships. We have a monthly meeting with the leaders of the associations, and there's probably about 15 or so leaders, including Together Georgia, who come to DFACS once a month for a provider leadership meeting, and we talk about what's going on in their agencies, what's going on with DFACS, and how we can work together. RCC is also a part of that meeting. And then we have a larger meeting that's called Practice Matters, and Practice Matters brings together, well, it invites every RBWO provider, which will be the contracted licensed agencies, to come together to talk about child welfare practice and how we can better work together as partners. And so we do have some of those things that are occurring.
Now, there was a discussion about having a uniform calendar by which you could see when site inspections were coming up, so I hope those discussions will continue. That may also help bridge some of the communication gap. It sounds like there's a lot of communication that goes on, which is very positive, good to hear. And then if every agency can get on board with utilizing the Georgia Score, then that may also help in identifying CCIs or CPAs that are not living up to the standards that we'd all like them to. The calendar would also maybe help reduce the number of inspections. On a different topic, this is more of a question. How many of the children that DFACS takes into their system, how many of those wind up being transferred or sent to places like Eagle Ranch or Windshape or any of those other homes, these privately funded homes? Oh.
Okay, sorry about that. I can only say anecdotally, but very few, because we don't have a contract with them. Eagles Ranch, I've personally made at least one family referral to them. They were not able to serve that family. Windshape Homes is just kind of coming into my my understanding that they're interested in working with DFACS, and we have a meeting scheduled to do a site visit with them on September the 5th. So we're going to start our conversations with them. But to my knowledge, I can't tell you that we've had zero, but I'm thinking it's very few, because any non-contracted provider has to come through the Office of Provider Management. Actually, I can say zero, because we don't have a contract with them. And if we did make any placements, the DFACS county offices would have to come through us to ask for a waiver. And so that, since we have none, I would have to say zero.
One of the, side stories to this entire process is trying to incentivize those that have the private funding to be receptive to taking on DFACS, to taking on children from DFACS, and DJJ for that matter. So what I'd like to ask you to think about is, how do we incentivize that? Because what we're hearing is there's a lot of layers of regulation, a lot of various, the licensing, then the OPM, contracting, et cetera. And I'm sure we'll hear more with DJJ. So you can see that it becomes, a regulatory morass in some ways for a private provider to say, do I really want to engage in this level of regulatory oversight? And I think that becomes a real barrier to engaging private providers to join into the system and take on more of the state-derived children. So I ask you to think about that, not only from a regulatory perspective, but I also would like us to think as a committee what else we can do to incentivize that the placement of children from DFACS into these private providers. Is there monetary incentives that we can look at? Is there tax incentives that we can look at? Other things like that. So I'll just place that seed in everyone's minds. Representative Housen.
Getting back to Georgia Scorecard, is Georgia Scorecard a data warehouse?
Georgia Score, yes, it's a database that's used by private providers where they warehouse their data, the information that they are responsible for.
Or do we contract it out, or is it run by the state?
We contract it out.
Who do you contract with?
Care Solutions. It's an agency, a company called Care Solutions.
Care Solutions.
Yes.
Okay.
And they manage that website and database for us.
So all your data is put into Care Solutions.
All of the agency and staff child-related data is in Shines, which is a DFACS database for children specifically, for DFACS children.
Is that run by the state, or is it contracted out?
Shines is managed by the state.
Is that Georgia Technology?
When you say Georgia Technology, you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. But Georgia Score is specifically designed for private providers.
Okay. Care Solution. Okay.
Yes.
And that's done on a contract basis?
Yes.
Okay.
And the Representative House, what you were speaking of regarding the red flags, that's something that we call predictive analytics. And that's something the agency is currently exploring. It's going to start with Child Protective Services, so that, like you said, when an intake comes in or a report comes in that a child's being abused or neglected, then if there are previous risk factors that have been identified through previous reports or involvement with the family, then that would sort of create a system of red flags. But that's where we're starting.
When
with
is that RFP coming out?
We're not quite there yet, but we are there. We are exploring.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Okay, I'll get so much time here.
Any other questions for DFACS? We have DJJ. I know that we've run into the lunch hour. If the committee has any objections, I would like to go ahead and hear from DJJ. They've been at both meetings and been very patient. And while it's fresh on our minds, I'd like to try to get that information in. If they're not, then thank you very much. I really appreciate it, Ms. Kelly, and Ms. Bryan, thank you so much for coming. Ms. Winstead, thank you.
Ms. Bryan's going to be with us very much time.
Oh, well.
She's going to be here the next meeting.
Oh,
I know she hopes not.
Advance congratulations to you. We have John Smith from DJJ. We also have Ms. Watson and Mr. Brown, I believe, are both here with us. Is that correct? And Ms. Watson, you have to make the commute up from Macon. Is that right?
Well, I work at central office here in Atlanta, but yes.
Oh, that's right. Well, thank you so much for being here, both of you. And if you would just give us an overview of your department and what your regulatory oversight is with respect to child care providers.
Okay. Good morning. Good afternoon now. My name is Raquel Watson. I'm the manager for residential and aftercare services for the Department of Juvenile Justice. Basically, what my unit's oversight is, and I think we all have a copy of our PowerPoint there with you. We currently, I'm on page 9 of that PowerPoint, just to give a brief overview of where we are today.
Just let me make sure everybody has that. It should be in your blue folder, I believe it is. Is that right? The blue folder? Make sure I've got it.
Is this like Lottie Sue's? Is this like Lottie Sue's?
Like
You
this,
hold it up too.
like this right here.
Everybody have that? Okay, very good.
Okay.
Like Lottie Sue's.
That's part of our agency as well, but the residential piece actually falls up on our Division of Community Services.
All right. Go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. On page 9, it basically states that the Department of Juvenile Justice has a total of 78 residential facilities that are contracted with the agency to provide residential oversight for our youth in child care institutions and or child placement agencies. With that total bed capacity of 1,400 beds that we actually share with DHS, Department of Human Services, DFACS.
Sorry, we just Chairman Weldon had to step away.
That's okay. And the next 2 points actually breaks that out for you. It actually speaks to the 65 jointly residential facilities that have a contract with both DJJ and DHS. And of that total number of 78, we have 13 that are DJJ only providers that currently only have a contract with DJJ as of today. And those numbers are fluid because right now we are both agency are in the process of new contracting processes. So that number can increase or decrease over the next few months as we get new contracts on board. The next page, page 10. Actually speaks to my staff that actually have the oversight components that we've been speaking of today for us, the announced and unannounced visits for our residential group homes. We currently have 4 regional treatment services specialists. The Department of Juvenile Justice is divided by 4 regions: Northwest, Northeast, Southeast, and Southwest regions. There's 1 specialist per region. And we also have 6 residential placement specialists who are responsible for actually securing those bed spaces for our youth that need residential placements. Currently, DJJ conducts 3 planned site visits per calendar year for our contracted vendors. 2 of those visits are unannounced visits and 1 is announced. The announced visit is planned and it's part of our utilization review process. And that process is where we review youth that are in placements every 6 months at our vendors. And during that time, one of the days during that review process is dedicated to a comprehensive audit overview of that programming component. The other 2 unannounced visits are throughout the calendar year, and it's based on the team's discretion as to when those visits will occur. And as Ms. Stokes spoke of, we're actually going to team together to see how we can streamline some of those visits now so they're not going back to back, so that the providers are not having so many turnarounds for for unannounced visits. Our agency also used the room board and watchful oversight standards that are in the binder that you have before you. We may have a few standards in there that are DJJ specific, and it's very rare that we go outside of those standards. Some of them may speak to our policies and procedures that are totally different than DHS, and that's based on safety and security as an agency that we have to oversee. As far as if we have any deficiencies on page 11, it speaks to actually what the site visits entail. During those visits, they can last anywhere between 60 minutes to an hour and a half, no more than 2 hours for any of our comprehensive visits. Any of the deficiencies that are notated on those visits are composed into a deficiency report, and we try to get those reports back to the facilities within 72 hours to let them know exactly what we found, what the areas of correction based on RBWO standards, any licensing regulations that we saw violations of, or any DJJ policy violations. As an agency, we are addressing our appeal process with this new process so that our agency, as well as the provider, have the ability to sit down and talk about any issues that we've seen, and if they have an appeal, we are actually addressing how we can better address that piece as well. Once the facility develops a corrective action plan and submit that back to us, the timeline for that depends on the deficiencies. If it's something that's real egregious, where if we've come out and the staff to youth ratio is the clear violation for supervision, then that's a critical that needs to be corrected within the 7 to 10 business days, because those are critical areas for supervision of kids, for the higher end kids, the maximum watchful oversight that we spoke of today. If it's something to the degree of physical plant, flooring, windows, just physical plant that needs to be fixed in the facilities, we work with the vendors to get that corrected within 30 days. We actually try to provide that technical oversight so that once we do address any deficiencies, we actually have a staff person, one of the regional treatment specialists that we spoke of. They're actually on site with that vendor trying to get them back into compliance. So they're there working with them. It may be they work site for 2 to 3 days to actually help that vendor kind of see what areas need to be corrected. So we're looking at it from a team approach with the vendor to make sure they're back in compliance. And that's basically how our agency is looking at as the announced and unannounced, holding the vendors accountable for the room board and watchful oversight standards, and the policies and procedures for our agency. Do you want to speak to any different?
I have some numbers question, and in the interest of time, Mr. Chairman, this may be something that you'll kind of direct people to get back to us at a later time. You have about 800 hard beds now, which are YDCs and RYDCs. Is that about correct?
It's a little over that, but that's within the ballpark, yes.
And these are beds, either this 1,400 or 1,273. What are the actual numbers of DJJ kids that are in these RBWO that are DJJ kids?
As of today, our RBWO place youth for base watchful oversight, we have 30 youth. Our additional watchful oversight, we have 70. And our maximum oversight, we have 221. So for the total as of today, the 25th of August, we have 321 kids in RBWO place.
What's your largest provider?
Our higher end maximum watchful oversight. And as of today, we have 77 youth in detention awaiting placement, and probably 90% of those are maximum watchful oversight youth that need placement.
And are these crossover children, or are these only DJJ children?
I'm not for sure about the actual joint numbers, but I can get that for you. But we do categorize it by joint as well. I can pull that.
Mr. Chairman, the reason I'm asking about crossover children is that there's some federal law that I've never really understood exactly about requirements of crossover children and the payments for those children and for reimbursement and all that. That's why they'll tell.
What do you mean by crossover children?
They're children that are jointly in the custody of DHS. They're a foster care child who has basically been in DJJ. And there's some federal oversight of that and some funding oversight of that y'all are working on with 4E money, and I just thought it might be helpful to understand that at some point, not necessarily today.
That's correct.
Because I don't understand it today.
Thank you, Representative Long.
I don't understand it.
Chairman Willard.
Thank you. Ms. Watson, I look at your numbers here, and it really speaks of finding sources of joint working relationship with DFACs. What is done differently as far as the inspections or need of the inspections that you do that would be different from what DFACs is doing?
I will turn to page.
I mean,
Page
outside
6.
the last 13, which is exclusively DJJ residential, you got 78 residential facilities, no, 65 of which are joint. That's what I'm looking at.
Yes. If you would turn to the PowerPoint, page 6.
6?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
One of the most critical areas for our agency for its oversight and compliance is PREA.
Yeah, that's federal.
Yes, and that's the Prison Rape Elimination Act.
Okay.
Starting last year, our agency has been tasked with not only addressing PREA in our facilities, our YDCs, but the oversight as well in the residential setting. So if we have a PREA incident that happens in one of our residential settings, we have to immediately address that. And we have a developer process with our internal Office of Investigations that is clearly outside of the way that we as agencies do our joint audits.
But those only come about as a result of an actual happening event, correct?
Yes, sir.
So I guess what I'm looking at, where you do the annual inspections and other surprise inspections, could there not be a intergovernmental agreement worked out with the DFACs to have them, in fact, do inspections that would meet the needs and sufficiency of what you're requiring in your agency? Mr. Brown.
I think that's something that we can discuss with them. Certainly, there are things of particular interest to us as an agency that may
Covered in your contract,
right.
Type thing, yeah.
But it's something that we certainly can discuss.
Sure. I think it's a good personnel saving, cost saving approach, and as well as the headaches of the people having be looking forward to inspections. Thank you.
Along those lines, what about the actual contracting itself? You have 13 that are exclusively residential facilities, then you have the remainder that the chairman was talking about. Could there not also be interagency cooperation, allowing OPM to actually administer the contracts? You draft them up in terms of terms that are important to DJJ, but allow OPM to oversee and administer the contracts and also do the inspections that are associated with those contracts. And some of the idea here is to free up people to do inspections that need to do inspections, to do the oversight that needs to be done at the field level, as opposed to the paperwork level.
I think on the issue of contracting, the Department of Juvenile Justice, we have a substantial contracting department for various contracts that we utilize at facilities throughout the state, the RYDCs, the YDCs, and so I'm not sure that there's that substantial of a portion. I believe there's 4 individuals that work in that office for the department, and I'm not sure it's a substantial portion that focus solely on residential contracts. So while certainly open to discussing that, I'm not sure just on face value that there's a substantial savings by saying the Department of Juvenile Justice is no longer going to contract with these 13 and we're going to push that over to OPM. And so that's something we're happy to explore, but after our meeting last month we kind of looked into that issue and just not certain that there's a huge personnel savings by going down that road.
Representative Tanner.
I just, in follow-up to that, I think we have to be cautious because the reason you have kids in custody is a completely different reason than the reason DFACS has kids in custody. And having dealt with these people on the front lines, these folks are children, but they also are people who many times have violated criminal law. So I think we have to be careful, and I know DFACS's mission is completely different than the Department of Juvenile Justice's mission. So I do think, though, and I agree that we need to encourage ways to do inspections at the same time, to limit the number of trips, if there's a way to have certain parts of the inspection done. But I also believe that DFACs, their inspectors do not have the expertise to look for the same things that's important to DJJ. So that's just a statement, Mr. Chairman. I think that in an effort to save money and time, we also have to remember that the kids that are in the DJJ custody are there for a different reason. So.
Is that something that, would you care to comment on that? Because you have the same ranking systems that's being utilized under the RBWO. You're utilizing the same ranking mechanisms, you're utilizing the same systems. There's obviously a maximum oversight, which has the predominant number of your children. Would you care to comment on to what degree those children need additional oversight over and above and beyond what would be provided in terms of an inspection by DFACs, and is there a possibility of cross-training individuals from DFACs so they can spot and identify that information for inspections?
I think all three of us may want to say something.
I guess I would look at one of our most critical needs for its placement. The Department of Juvenile Justice have a high level of sex offender placements that we have to have oversight. And one of our charged parts of our mission is safety and security. And a lot of times with that comes in the youth has supervision conditions that they have to comply, whether they're in the facility or in a residential setting, that truly sometimes can go outside of the lines of RBWO to a higher level. So a lot of times when our youth are placed with the MWO providers, there are other stipulations on top of the MWO standards that provider is being asked to take on to service that youth. And a lot of time it's hard for us to place our youth because of that, but that's our mission, to be charged with the safety and security of not only that child but the community. So if we was to have an incident at that facility, we have to have a response within an hour. They have to make sure they're following our emergency protocol. That's totally in addition to the RBWO standards. So a lot of times if we have critical violations and deficiencies with reporting, that's why we have to be a part of that process on the front end. And not saying that it couldn't happen if someone else was doing the inspection, but if that inspection happened early on in the week and we didn't get notification until probably 5 or 7 days later, there are some real violations that as an agency we're going to have to take on. So it's some critical areas for us. The treatment piece, we have a high rate of runaways with our youth. We have monitoring devices that are placed on our youth. In addition to being placed, we put other measures in place to keep them, to try to give them the opportunity to have a home-like environment, even though they have some of those critical issues.
Guessing, not assuming, that of the 470 child protection reports that X percentage of them are from your facilities?
Yes, ma'am.
Children on children or staff on children?
Yes.
Right.
Well, there was a Mr. Brown, you said that all three may want to talk, so I
You know what, when you have good employees, there's no need to echo. I think she did an excellent job, so I don't have anything to add once she said that.
All right. John, do you want to?
Nothing further, I'll leave it at that.
Okay. All right. Other comments or questions from members of the committee?
I want to know about the 470 reports. Where they come from, what's confirmed, what it reflects in your opinion.
Representative, just tell me again the 470 that you're talking about.
Child protective complaints of abuse and neglect that are set out in the DHS right here on page, it's this.
Okay.
Doesn't have a page number.
On the RCC you hand out.
470 Child Protective Service referrals.
Would you like to know the number of those that are DJJ first?
Yeah. Y'all, that looks like a comprehensive number, I'm guessing, and that, so there'd be a comprehensive summary.
All right.
Yes, ma'am.
Other comments, questions? All right, thank you very much, Mr. Brown. Ms. Watson, thank you so much. Ms. Smith, thank you. We really do appreciate the service you're providing and the protections you're providing both to the public and to the children. And thank you for being patient and letting us go as long as we have. With that, what we'll do is I need just a few minutes of the committee before we depart. We have been scheduling these meetings on a 2-week intervals with Monday mornings. It would be my wish that we have at least one more meeting as a committee to ask additional questions amongst the committee members, to look at any other questions that are outstanding, and those that have been asked to provide information or documents, that be made available to us by that next meeting. The question is, would meeting 2 weeks from this Monday be possible for the committee members or not, and so that we can go ahead and schedule that for
Labor Day? No, it's the week, Monday after Labor Day.
after.
It's the 8th, I think.
It is the 8th, yes. Same time, same location, same bat channel.
Mr. Chairman, I was going to ask Mr. Smith, too. I'd like to know how many of the children in either DJJ or DFACS facilities are arrested from your facility and sent to some either jail or YDC or RYDC in your comprehensive kind of numbers. So that's something, Chairman.
Yeah, we are both hearing stories of incidents where this has occurred and the child remains there for an unusually long period of time because they don't have representation. So we try to be sure those kind of incidents don't continue to happen.
Or if they happen, your facility has to post the bond.
Yeah, that's what right.
Those numbers that would expect to bring those to that next meeting.
Please do.
Thank you.
Be helpful.
Thank you.
And there is, for the committee, I just want to make you aware, Ms. Fielding was, I cut her off, but she was going to turn your attention to a single-page assessment that's titled DFACS DHS Proposals for Eliminating Administrative Burdens and Oversight. This is a document, I'll speak and you correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Fielding, but this is a document that the agency had compiled as a result of hearing previous discussions from providers and other meetings of trying to see how they could best streamline their efforts. And I think DJJ is a part of that process. Your acronym's not listed up here, but to the extent that you're involved in that, please continue those discussions. My wish is that at the next meeting is that we have more concrete identified either regulatory code provisions that need to be amended or changed. If there are any statutory provisions that need to be addressed, I'd like to know what those specifically, what statutes we need to address in terms of assignment of duties or responsibilities to help streamline this, to help clear the way for a lack of or ambiguity that may exist as to who has what responsibility. And then, of course, the rules and regulations. If the rules and regulations need to be addressed, whether it be dealing with shampoo or it needs to be dealing with the inspections, number of inspections, when those occur, then we need to go over those specifically. So let's focus in on actual statutory and regulatory language that we want to look at that need revision. But this does give you an overview. This sheet that's been provided does give you an overview of some of the internal attempts that the agencies are looking at to try and resolve issues between the two. And then again, if there's ways to incentivize private providers, private finance providers, then I'd like to hear from them again. If the agencies have some ideas how to better create better cooperation between the two, then I think that's important for us to look at as well. So we'll reconvene on the 8th of September at 10 a.m. this room, and again I appreciate the committee's time and dedication to this issue and all the questions and comments that have been provided. With that, if there's nothing else, I'll move for an adjournment. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank